Members could just take their seats. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's latest energy policy. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the government has not modelled its impact on business?
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The Leader of the House will cease interjecting, as will the Minister for Energy and the Environment. The Leader of the Opposition will begin his question again. I need to hear the question. The Leader of the Opposition has the
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's latest energy policy. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the government has not modelled its impact on business, has not modelled its impact on renewable energy jobs, has not modelled its impact on the broader economy, has not modelled its impact on households? Why should Australians believe anything that this Prime Minister says about a lousy 50-cent saving in people's power bills?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, earlier today, the Leader of the Opposition stood in front of some solar panels, and for a little while he was talking sense, and then a beam of sunlight struck the panel and he was transformed, not into a werewolf, but in an economic fantasist. Mr. Speaker, this is what he said. He said renewable energy is getting cheaper every day and will continue to do so. He did. He said it's correct to say we've been moving down the renewable energy path and we're seeing the benefits. And then he said it needs to be subsidised. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is the bit that we're struggling to understand. Mr. Speaker, his comrade in arms, defying economics, of course, was the member for Sydney. And she said, she's even more emphatic, she said to Kieran Gilbert that the renewables are becoming cheaper all the time and are already cheaper than coal. Now Kieran Gilbert, Mr. Speaker,
members on my right.
Kieran Gilbert was not asking an unreasonable question when he said, so why subsidise them? Fairly obvious. And she said, it's not about subsidies, it's about certainty. So this is the Labor Party. It's about certainty. I'll tell you what the certainty is. $66 billion of costs loaded onto Australian families and Australian businesses in order to subsidise technologies that are already the cheapest alternative, according to the Labor Party. Mr. Speaker, if Labor was remotely fair dinkum or consistent about this, they would welcome the level playing field that our energy guarantee offers. The level playing field. Mr. Speaker, there are two constraints in the energy guarantee plan recommended by the Energy Security Board. One is to keep the lights on. Most people regard that as a very high priority, not the Labor Party, obviously. We do. The other one is to ensure that you meet your Paris commitments. That's very important too. And then you've got to do so in the least cost manner. That's the triple bottom line. That's what the Energy Security Board has recommended, a plan to deliver. It's about time Labor started becoming consistent and principled and rational and support the advice of the experts.
Members on my left, the member for Kingsford Smith will cease interjecting. The member for Bono.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on actions the government is taking to reduce power bills for hard-working families and businesses and improve the reliability of Australia's energy system, including in my electorate of Bono?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. Mr. Speaker, affordability, reliability, responsibility. That's what the energy guarantee delivers.
Member for
That's
Bruce.
what it delivers. That's what it delivers, and it is based on the advice of the smartest people in the industry, the regulators and the operators, assembled in the Energy Security Board by COAG, appointed by Labor governments, Liberal governments, working together. These are the experts that we have been called on to listen to for so long. That's an Energy Security Board. This is their recommendation. And Mr Speaker, what does their advice say? It says that the best, most effective way to reduce power bills, improve the reliability of our energy system, which, as the member for Port Adelaide knows very well, is far from reliable in his state, so we know exactly what Labor's policies are going to result in: massive hikes in energy costs and a big drop in reliability. Blackouts, blackouts and more blackouts is what we've seen from Labor, and higher bills. Energy costs doubling under the last Labor government. And Mr Speaker, their advice is that we should integrate climate policy and energy policy through the market to ensure the least cost route to deliver the lowest prices we can for Australian families. That's their advice. And Mr Speaker, we keep on being asked for guarantees. I can guarantee, Mr Speaker, that the authors of this recommendation know a lot more about energy and economics than anyone sitting opposite us today. These are the people, chaired by Kerry Schott. I heard the member for McMahon talking about high school economics. Very good. It's much to be commended. Kerry Schott has a PhD in pure mathematics from the University of Oxford. She has chaired energy companies. With John Pearce, the head of the AEMC, one of the finest Treasury secretaries in the history of the state of New South Wales, has been involved in the energy sector for decades. Audrey Siebelman was the energy market operator in New York. And then, of course, you've got Paula Conboy, who was a regulator in Ontario. This group of people assembles expertise, was put together as recommended by Alan Finkel, and we went to them for advice. And this is the advice we've got. What this will deliver is cheaper electricity, lower wholesale costs, savings for households and reliability. That's the triple bottom line we're delivering. It's the triple bottom line Labor is destroying and defying. They've failed. We've got the answers here from the ESB. Labor should adopt it.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Before I call the member for Melbourne Ports, the member for Lyons was interjecting continuously through that answer. He will cease interjecting. If he interjects again, he will be ejected immediately. And for the member for Brand, I also cautioned her during the answer, but I'm pretty sure she didn't hear me because she didn't break sentence. She kept going. The member for Port Adelaide has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Last night on Lateline, when asked whether she would personally guarantee to the people of Australia that their energy bills will be cheaper in 3 years' time under the Prime Minister's latest energy policy, the chair of the Energy Security Board, Kerry Schott, said, and I quote, "I don't think anybody can guarantee a price reduction." When even the chair of the government's Energy Security Board can't guarantee that energy prices will fall for households, why should the Australian people believe the Prime Minister's so-called guarantee?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, one thing we can guarantee is that if you impose a $66 billion subsidy on the Australian energy sector and you get the taxpayers to pay for that, you can guarantee that electricity bills are going to be higher. And if you can also guarantee that if you continue to ignore the need for dispatchable baseload power, then you will get more blackouts. And if you get more blackouts, then you will get more volatility, then you will pay higher prices even more so. Mr Speaker, we know how this Labor horror movie goes. It's been playing in South Australia for years. We know exactly what it does. They have no conception of the engineering and the economics that we need to deliver a reliable and affordable energy plan. And as for Dr Schott, well, Mr Speaker, I can say to the Labor Party Eddie Obeid couldn't intimidate her, and neither can any of his friends opposite. Mr. Speaker, Kerry Schott is one of the finest public servants in this country. And this is what she said. This is what she said. The guarantee is about providing a reliable power system and meeting the emissions targets set in the Paris Agreement. What will happen when those mechanisms are put in place is that prices are likely to come down, and they're likely to keep coming down. And that is exactly the same advice that we received in the letter from the Energy Security Board, the experts that we've been called on to listen to and take advice from. What did they say, Mr. Speaker? They said wholesale prices are expected to decline by 20 to 25% over the same period, 2020 to 2030, and that could lead to a reduction in residential bills in the order of $100 to $115 per annum. Compared to the clean energy target as specified in the Finkel Review, this guarantee could be expected to lead to wholesale prices that are on average 8 to 10% lower over the 2020-2030 period. Now, Mr. Speaker, what we'd like to see, we've seen the Leader of the Opposition morph from a plausibly rational person to being completely irrational and saying that the cheapest, energy source needs to be subsidised. That's unusual. That's shortnomics, it really is. But what we'd like to see is a bit more of the nice Leader of the Opposition, the genial, bipartisan one, who wrote to me and said the most effective policy for investment certainty in the energy sector is bipartisanship. We believe it's time to put an end to the climate wars. We call on the government to work with us in a bipartisan approach. Well, you've got a recommendation
the Prime Minister's
from
time
a bipartisan
has
appointed
concluded.
expert. Why don't you accept it?
The member for Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer advise the House on the action the government is taking to provide certainty for investment in Australia, including in our energy sector, by guaranteeing an affordable, reliable energy supply for hard-working families and businesses? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for Ford for his question. He was re-elected at the last election on a platform of the Turnbull government, always doing things to drive investment, always doing things to secure the confidence of investors, to invest in the jobs that are generated by that investment and the more and better paid jobs that are coming under this government, Mr. Speaker. Some 325,000 jobs created in the last year alone, Mr. Speaker. And in the budget we said yes. We said yes to $75 billion in nation-building infrastructure investment to drive investment, whereas the Labor Party continues to say no. They said no to the East-West Link. They said no to the WestConnex. They've even said no to the F6 extension in southern Sydney today, Mr. Speaker. They said no back in their own electorates, like the Shadow Treasurer does on the Western Sydney Airport in Fairfield, saying no to these projects. We said yes to cutting taxes for small and medium-sized businesses and legislated to do that now cover half of the Australian labour force. The Labor Party said no to cutting those taxes, and they're saying no to ensure that Australian businesses have a competitive tax rate right across the board, because that's necessary because of the taxes being cut in France, in the United Kingdom, in the United States and also in China, Mr. Speaker, where they're looking to do the same thing. And in the budget we said yes, Mr. Speaker, to all of these initiatives to drive investment. And yesterday we said yes to providing certainty for investment in boosting energy supply through the National Energy Guarantee that will make power more affordable, more reliable and achieve our environmental commitments. Business and industry have said yes to that, Mr. Speaker. Economists have said yes to that, Mr. Speaker. The Chief Scientist has said yes, Mr. Speaker, to the National Energy Guarantee. And what has Labor done again? Labor have said no. Labor have no plans for investment certainty. They only have a plan to say no, Mr. Speaker, on every single occasion as this government works to drive investment that support jobs, that support certainty, that support higher paid jobs and that support a growing economy, Mr. Speaker. Instead, what they do is they look for any excuse to say no. any and every excuse, and they will sink to seeking to discredit and bully even an energy security board with people appointed by Labor state governments, and yet we've seen them in interview after interview seek to undermine those independently appointed members of that board, seeking to bully and intimidate like the unions they defend and protect for that behaviour in this place on every single day, Mr Speaker. The recipe from those opposite is higher taxes, higher subsidies, $66 billion in higher costs for Australian business and consumers, which means
Treasurer's
less
time
investment.
has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Last night on Lateline, Kerry Schott stated, "I don't think anybody can guarantee a price reduction." Was the Chair of the Energy Security Board correct?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Chairman of the Energy Security Board has accurately described the advice that she has given, which is that a consequence of having a level playing field, combining climate and energy policy in a means that getting rid of the subsidies, having a level playing field, is likely to result in a 20 to 25% reduction in wholesale prices. Well,
Members
Mr.
on my
Speaker,
left.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I quote from their letter, wholesale prices are expected to decline by 20
Members
to
on my left.
25% per annum over the same period. Mr. Speaker, the pathetic thing about the opposition in this field today is that they have called repeatedly for us to take the advice of experts. And Alan Finkel recommended an Energy Security Board be established. And COAG, including state Labor governments, appointed the members of the Energy Security Board. And will they support the member for Port Adelaide was gushing in his praise of the independent chairman and deputy chairman,
The Prime
Claire
Minister
Savage.
will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yeah, just a point of order on relevance. It was a very straight and narrow question.
The
Was
Leader
Dr.
of the
Schott
Opposi-
right?
The Leader of the
Yes or
Opposition
no?
will resume his
Can you-
seat. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. There is no point of order. The Prime Minister has the call. Member for Bruce will leave
Mr.
under 94A.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Kerry Schott is one of our nation's greatest public servants, energy experts, economists, mathematicians, and what she said on Lateline is absolutely correct, and what honourable members opposite know is the case. The fact of the matter is this. The fact of the matter is this, as she said, and as we know, there are many impacts on a household's electricity bill. Wholesale prices are one important factor. But there's also the matter of the price of fuel, which is not affected by this policy, the price of gas. What did Labor do to gas? They sent the price through the roof through not protecting domestic demand. What have we done? We've brought the price of gas down by ensuring that Australians are protected and they get the gas they need. Another big factor too is the cost of networks. That is not affected by the energy guarantee. It's a separate issue. That is being attacked by the abolition of the limited merits review, now through the parliament. The reality is, as Rod Sims has said, as Kerry Schott has said, as John Pearce has said, as we all know, except those in this parallel universe of ideology and political stupidity opposite, what we all know is that energy prices are affected by many measures. This national energy guarantee will deliver lower wholesale prices than any alternative. And that's what Australians need, reliability, affordability and responsibility. We have a plan. Labor's just got one wine after another.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. It's the independence question. The member for Kennedy. Start the clock. The member for Kennedy has the call.
Prime Minister, the electricity prices in Victoria, Queensland and South Australia in the 13 years, 1989-2002, rose from $650 to $780, a minuscule $130 in 13 years. From 2002, all pricing was done by free open market operations and the industry wholly corporatised and privatised. In the next 13 years, the price skyrockets from $810 to $2,130, a $1,300 increase. Since NEMCO quotes environmental charges at only 25% of current costs, clearly the price
member for Kennedy will resume his seat. The member for Kennedy will resume his seat. We'll take that as a 45-second statement. We'll go to the member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister
Member for Chisholm resume their
Environment.
seat. The member for Kennedy's been asked to resume his... The member for Kennedy will resume his seat. There was no question. There was no question. The member for Kennedy will resume his seat. The member for Kennedy will not reflect on the chair. The member for Kennedy, unlike members of the opposition, has additional time to ask a question. Special rules have been put in place to allow 45 seconds, and they were put in place principally for him. And there was 45 seconds of quotes and statements without a question. This is question time, and I'm not going to be lectured by the member for Kennedy. The member for Chisholm has the call. The member for Chisholm has the call.
My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Energy. Will the Minister update the House on the government's action to guarantee affordable and reliable energy for hard-working Australian families and businesses, including in my electorate of Chisholm? How does this compare to the risks associated with the alternative approaches?
The Minister for the Energy and the Environment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Chisholm for her question and acknowledge her deep interest and concern in the energy sector and the rising power prices and the importance of taking action on a number of fronts to reduce the pressure on family electricity bills. And the Turnbull government's been taking action on a number of fronts. Including in reining in the power of the networks, in ensuring a better deal for families from the retailers and ensuring that Australians get access to Australia's largest manufacturer, BlueScope Steel. Paul O'Malley said it turns the game around. It retilts the playing field, and it's fair. Australia's chief scientist, Alan Finkel, said it's a credible mechanism from the country's most authoritative voice in energy matters, Mr Speaker. AGL described it as an important step. Energy Australia said it was a serious proposal. Origin said we look forward to working with the governments and energy market bodies to progress it. Energy Networks Australia welcomed it. The Grattan Institute described it as the last piece in the complex jigsaw puzzle of a credible energy and climate change policy, and it said it should be supported not just within the coalition, but by Labor, the states, the energy industry and by electricity consumers. Energy Consumers Australia welcomed it and said it integrates the need for reliable power and emissions reduction in the electricity sector at least cost for consumers. The BCA, which represents 1 in 10 Australian workers through the companies, says it provides greater investor confidence than a more complex set may have. The Australian Industry Group, which represents more than 1 million employees, said the plan gives the electricity sector a great deal of flexibility.
The Minister's time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced his National Energy Guarantee. But today, the Treasurer agreed that when it came to savings on power bills, the guarantee was actually a prediction. And just now, the Prime Minister confirmed that his lousy 50-cent savings are only likely. Doesn't this make an absolute mockery of the Prime Minister's so-called guarantee?
The Prime Minister has the call.
100%. I know it's confusing.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can understand the way in which the Leader of the Opposition is squirming on this issue. I can understand his embarrassment, having called for bipartisanship, having called for us to listen to experts, having supported the establishment of the Energy Security Board. Then, when these independent experts, authorities in the field, give an advice that doesn't suit him politically, he wants to attack them personally. He wants to challenge their integrity. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, he was having a go at the integrity of the Energy Security Board, muttering to himself. Oh, he was. I could hear him muttering away to himself, talking to himself, I think, yes, but may well have been the case. You'll always get an attentive audience when he does that. Mr. Speaker, what we have is the advice from the Energy Security Board that will deliver affordable and reliable power. What it does is ensure that the energy market operator will not have to be, as she is every other weekend, intervening in the South Australian energy market, calling on expensive gas-fired generation just to keep the lights on because there is not enough dispatchable power in the South Australian market. What this will do is ensure that we have reliable power, that is affordable power, and that we meet our emissions reduction obligations under the Paris Agreement. Now, what the experts have done is given us that advice, and we know that that is advice from the most qualified people in the nation. Their establishment was recommended by Alan Finkel. Their recommendations have been welcomed by Alan Finkel. They've been welcomed by the industry. They've been welcomed by distinguished commentators like Tony Wood of the Grattan Institute. This is seen as the best chance we've had for years to achieve a bipartisan energy policy that will restore investment certainty into the market. And Mr. Speaker, I refer the honourable members to the Energy Security Board's letter to us, letter to the government, public document. Under this scheme, the wholesale price would be expected to be lower relative to today and lower compared to a certificate-based scheme. So they've carefully considered the recommendation of the Finkel Review for a clean energy target, and what they've come up with is a mechanism that works even better, that does a better job on reliability, does the same job of reducing emissions, very important, but above all, because it integrates climate and energy policy, results in lower costs and hence lower prices for Australian families. Everything we're doing is aimed at bringing prices down.
Concluded. The member for Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Agriculture, Water Resources in Northern Australia. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on how the government's National Energy Guarantee will deliver affordable and reliable energy for hard-working families across regional Australia, including my electorate of Flynn? Is he aware of any alternative approaches?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question and acknowledge the hard work he does for people in Biloela as he makes sure the people in Biloela and the Weatherboard 9 have affordable power and do not have to deal with the policies of the basket weavers, or look after the people in Eidsvale. The people of Eidsvale who need to get affordable and reliable power, who need the dignity of that in their lives, and don't have to put up with a policy that's been delivered by sort of incense sticks, which is the policy of the Labor Party. Or the people of Mount Morgan, who do not believe that they're politically incorrect, do believe that as blue-collar workers they still deserve a job. Or the people of Wandai, who believe in affordable power, not wind chime power, which is what the Labor Party wants to deliver to them. No, these people understand that we have a plan to bring forward power to make sure the baseload power stays on the system, the coal-fired power keeps going. Our plan is backed by the National Energy Guarantee, supported by the National Irrigators Council, BlueScope, AGL, Energy Networks Australia, the Grattan Institute of Australia, the Australian Industry Group, the Australian Chamber of Commerce, the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Energy Council, the Energy Users of Australia, because they know that this is a diligent plan. And the member for Flynn would probably be aware of this, because in the member for Flynn seat he has a big coal-fired power station that supports nearly 1,000 workers, amongst other things, at the Boyne smelter. These are blue-collar jobs, and the member for Flynn is standing behind those blue-collar jobs. The member for Flynn is not embarrassed about blue-collar jobs. The member for Flynn is a pragmatist about how we keep these men and women in a job. And I want to quote someone from the Labor Party who was talking about that Gladstone coal-fired power station. This member from the Labor Party said this: "Naturally, the Australian Labor Party welcomes the Commonwealth's participation in the provision of electricity in central Queensland, which is an area where power has been hardest to come by and is the most expensive in Australia." That member for the Labor Party, a very prominent member for the Labor Party, later went on to say about this, and he was talking about it, he said, "The only problem he has with the coal-fired power is that the advance was not a grant." Now, who was that member of the Labor Party? Who could that be? I'll take the interjection. They've just said Mark Latham. No, a bit better than that. You might remember this bloke who believed in coal-fired power, Edward Gough Whitlam. And boy, oh boy, hasn't the apple fallen a long way from the tree? The apple's gone all the way from central Queensland.
Members on my left.
The basket weavers now run this bastard. The basket weavers. So I can say to them, men and women of Australia, if you want to play $66,000 million more than you have to, $66,000 million out of your wallet, then vote
Member
for the
for Griffith.
liability which is Bill.
The member for Sydney, if you could just pause for a second. Members on both sides, if you could cease interjecting. I'd like to inform the House we have present in the gallery this afternoon an Australian Political Exchange Council's 25th delegation from the People's Republic of China. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you. The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Before coming to office, the Liberals promised Australians their power bills would drop by $550 a year. They didn't. This year, the Prime Minister promised that wholesale
Member for Sydney
gas
will resume her
prices
seat. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Treasurer will cease interjecting. The member for Sydney will begin her question again. The clock will start again.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Before coming to office, the Liberals promised Australians their power bills would drop by $550. They didn't. This year, the Prime Minister promised that wholesale gas prices would halve. They haven't. And yesterday it was revealed that the Prime Minister's latest energy policy might only reduce the power bills of Australians by a lousy 50 cents a week in 3 years' time. Why would the Australian people believe anything this Prime Minister says about energy prices?
The Minister for Energy and the Environment.
Well, Mr Speaker, thank the member for her question, and I can read from an ACCC report. Which says about the abolition of the carbon tax, the Commonwealth Treasury's estimated $550 cost saving to households is reasonable, Mr Speaker. So there we go. The Labor Party again, telling a mistruth like the one that they repeated in this House about a $1,000 increase, which went against the advice of the Australian Energy Regulator and other agencies, which they haven't had the courage to repeat in this place, Mr Speaker. And we have been very successful in not just abolishing the carbon tax, but also in seeing the wholesale spot price for gas come down from about $12 at the beginning of this year to about $7 right now, Mr Speaker, and putting pressure on the Queensland Labor government to rein in CS Energy and Stanwell, who are engaged in uncompetitive bidding practices. And as a result of that direction, we saw wholesale electricity prices in Queensland fall by about 25%, Mr Speaker. And then, of course, the work the Prime Minister did with retailers. And I can inform the House that a family of 4 from Turramurra in Sydney, with electricity costs of just under $2,800 a year, used the government's Energy Made Easy website, switched suppliers, and as a result will save around $650 a year, Mr Speaker. And about a family of 3 students who are living in St Kilda in Melbourne with electricity costs of about $1,420 a year. And they used the Victorian electricity website and they saved around $230 a year, Mr Speaker. And there was a family of 3 living in Ashgrove in Brisbane, and they had electricity costs of about $2,850 a year. And as a result of the Prime Minister's intervention and promotion of the ability to switch retailers and contracts, they used the government's Energy Made Easy website, they switched suppliers, and as a result they'll save about $630 a year, Mr Speaker. And we know that under our proposal recommended to us by the Energy Security Board, the savings to households will be better than the ones that were promoted by the Clean Energy Target, which the member for Port Adelaide described himself as a second best option. So, Mr Speaker, the Labor Party is isolated. They are standing alone in opposition to the recommendation from the experts. The industry, the big users, the industry organisations have all come around to support this initiative as one that will deliver reliable,
The Minister's
affordable
time has
power.
concluded. The member for Murray.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. I refer the Minister to media reports in the Riverine Herald in September that showed essential health services are at risk due to skyrocketing energy costs. Will the Minister update the House on the importance of a reliable and affordable supply of energy to Australia's rural and regional hospitals?
The Minister for Health has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Murray. Labor loves higher power prices. Labor believes in higher power prices, and their policies at both federal and state level are designed to deliver higher power prices. And that is bad for our hospitals. That is bad for Echuca Hospital, which the member for Murray believes in, supports and has been an advocate of throughout his time in Parliament. Now, why is this important? It's important because there are not just 2 policies, but 2 fundamental approaches here. One side of Parliament consistently advocates for and then puts in place policies to put pressure to drive up power prices. One side believes in lower power prices and has taken steps to that effect. For the people of Murray, this matters in the real world, because what we saw at Echuca Hospital is the real world. The Chief Executive said only a month ago that the consequence of the changes in Victoria's power system will mean a $375,000 a year cost for Echuca Hospital. When Hazelwood was deliberately knocked out by the Victorian government, the people of Echuca and the hospital in Echuca paid that price. As the Chief Executive said, quote, "It's significant and it's a serious issue for the whole community in terms of the power price hike, but in the context of public hospitals, it has a material impact on our budget in this current financial year." In other words, Labor policies are deliberately driving up the cost of electricity and the cost of operations for hospitals, not just in Victoria, but around the country. By contrast, we abolished the carbon tax and it did drive down electricity prices. We've abolished limited merits review and that will have an impact. the Prime Minister has specifically worked along with the Energy Minister with the gas companies, and the wholesale price of gas has dropped from $12 to $7, and now there is the energy security guarantee for Australia, and that is the next step. All are about bringing down power prices. What we see now, though, is that when Labor gets its hands on the levers of power in Victoria, they knocked over the Hazelwood Power Station. In South Australia, they literally blew up the Northern Power Station. At national level, last time they introduced a carbon tax, and next time they are going to introduce a $66 billion hit on bills for families, on bills for pensioners and on bills for our hospital. So if you believe in the security of our hospital system, you will not believe in Labor's approach to power pricing. It's a threat to pensioners, it's a threat to families, and above all else, it's a threat to our hospital system.
The member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Under this Prime Minister, carers didn't get the government's one-off $75 energy assistance payment, and they're facing the abolition of their energy supplement, a cut of $365 a year. When the Prime Minister is already ripping hundreds of dollars away from carers, is he really so out of touch he expects carers to thank him because they might get a lousy 50-cent saving on their power bills in 3 years' time?
The Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member for Jagga Jagga raises the issue of the energy supplement. And what is fascinating about the member for Jagga Jagga raising the issue of the energy supplement and the savings that would be garnered for the federal budget by virtue of that removal,
the Treasurer will cease interject.
is that the member for Jagga Jagga was part of a team that has already made that saving, banked it and spent it. Already made that saving and banked it and spent it. And one needs only to look directly at the Labor Party's fiscal plan, their election document, and in that there is a very long list of what are known as reversals, Mr Speaker, on page 30, and the list of reversals is long, but there is one thing suspiciously absent from the list of savings reversals, and that is the energy supplement. And that is the energy supplement. And what then happened was the Leader of the Opposition was asked about the energy supplement, and he was asked about the Labor's fiscal plan.
Member for Jagga Jagga.
He was asked about the Labor fiscal plan, and he said in an interview that the Labor position on savings measures after the 2016 election would be, quote, consistent with what was in the Labor's fiscal plan before the election. And was the Labor's fiscal plan before the election saving the energy supplement, banking it and spending it? It absolutely was. Is the position now consistent? Well, that is absolutely anyone's guess. But what the member for Jagga Jagga does is gets up here and criticises the government for making a savings measure which they have made, which they have banked and which they have already spent. And in the process of doing so, the member for Jagga Jagga criticises the fact that the energy guarantee has the capacity to deliver a savings in 2020 each year of up to $115 a week. Now, a year. Now, the criticism of that is that it's not enough, Mr Speaker. And in fact, Senator Dastyari tried to make that criticism today with a cheeseburger. Now, I understand he was more of a Chinese food aficionado, but here. But the fact is, $115 a year, $115 a year as a potential savings to Australian households is actually significant. It mightn't be significant to members opposite who prefer Chinese food and fine Chinese restaurants, but a potential $115 saving a year in 2020 is very, very significant. It is absolutely significant when you compare it to the potential cost increases for the average electricity bill that are going to occur if you try and put $66 billion worth of taxpayers' money into subsidising renewables, which members opposite also say don't need subsidisation because they are competitive.
The Minister's time has concluded. The member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Will the minister update the House on the government's commitment to guarantee an affordable and reliable energy supply, and why this is so critical to the delivery of the National Defence Industry Project? And, Minister, what are the risks of taking an alternative approach?
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I appreciate the member for Fairfax interest in the National Defence Industry Project, the same interest that the member for Boothby has, who asked me a question yesterday about defence industry, and I didn't get quite the opportunity to answer it that I had anticipated. So this answer is for both the member for Fairfax and the member for Boothby. They, like all members on this side of the House, recognise the transformational nature of the industrial base of Australia because of the Turnbull government's commitment to the National Defence Industry Project, driving billions and billions of dollars of investment, thousands and thousands of jobs right across Australia. Just last week, in fact, Mr Speaker, we announced 600 new jobs at the Osborne shipyards in construction, 150 new jobs at Saab Australia in the combat management systems because of this government. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Future frigates, offshore patrol vessels, the Joint Strike Fighters, which have got a big impact in states like Queensland, the surface-to-air missile defence systems, satellite ground systems, right across defence and defence industry. We are driving the economy. But one of the things that all of these projects have in common, Mr Speaker, is they need reliable and affordable power. They must have reliable and affordable power, and that is what the National Energy Guarantee provides, Mr Speaker. It means more capacity in the system, more supply, driving down the price, working with the other elements of the government's energy policy, which are also driving down price and driving up reliability. Now, who could be against a policy that ensures reliability and drives down the price of energy, Mr Speaker? No sensible person would, and that's why, as the Minister for the Environment and Energy pointed out, there's been so many third-party endorsements of this policy in the last 24 hours. Well, there are two people who are against it. There's the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, who's like the dog that caught the car on this policy, Mr Speaker. He's been demanding a policy on energy that would drive down prices and reliability, and now he's caught it. He doesn't know quite what to do with it, Mr Speaker, and he's leading the Labor Party into a very bad policy position because he's like the dog that caught the proverbial. The other person, Mr Speaker, is the Premier of South Australia. The Premier of South Australia who just wants to pick a fight with Canberra. He's not in the least bit interested in affordability or reliability, Mr Speaker. He's the one that's given us the canary in the coal mine that is South Australia. We've seen what Labor's policy does. It means blackouts and it means unaffordable power, and Jay Weatherill wants to continue that, and so does the other side of the House. They want to put $66 billion of subsidies into something they've already decided is competitive with coal and gas.
The Minister's time has
Get on
concluded.
board.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Today the Treasurer said the opposition had been provided with all the documentation the government had on its latest energy policy. Can the Treasurer confirm that the sum total of documentation provided to the opposition is a single letter? Given the opposition has received absolutely no other documentation, modelling or evidence from the government, can the Treasurer confirm that the Cabinet and the Joint Party Room considered and adopted a major government policy based purely on the vibe?
The Treasurer has the call.
That's pathetic. The Shadow Treasurer is such a sook. He's such a terrible, sad sook. Here are the papers the government has available to it that are available to the opposition. The ACCC's inquiry into gas, Mr Speaker. The interim report, and it's some 75 pages. The ACCC's report into retail electricity pricing, Mr Speaker, some 175 pages. The electricity statement of opportunities prepared by AEMO, Mr Speaker, which I table, Mr Speaker. The advice to Commonwealth Government on dispatchable capacity, Mr Speaker, which I'm happy to table, Mr Speaker. And I have another document here. It's a statement from the Chief Scientist, Dr Alan Finkel, on the Australian Government's energy announcement, which he says
The process was thorough. The emissions reduction trajectory is provided. A credible mechanism to enable the regulators to ensure the new emissions energy enters the market. A new lower emissions generation should occur in the context of a generator reliability obligation, and it imposes an equivalent obligation, Mr Speaker. They are just some of the documents, just some which I table, which is available to the Shadow Treasurer to peruse, who over this entire debate, Mr Speaker, has showed an inadequacy of understanding when it comes to energy issues. This is the Shadow Treasurer which yesterday came into this place and went on about regulatory impact statements when his own party, his own government, failed to produce a regulatory impact statement for Cabinet for the Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme, the Renewable Energy Electricity Amendment Bill, the Fair Work Amendment Bill, the National Broadband Network Implementation Bill, labour market testing for 457 workers, tax law amendment bills brought by the Shadow Treasurer when he was the Assistant Treasurer himself, Mr Speaker, and includes the Monty of them all, the mineral resource rent tax, which the member for Lilley will remember well, Mr Speaker. The private health insurance rebate has been denied for Bowen therapy, Mr Speaker.
The Treasurer will resume the members by their correct titles. The member for Tangney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the Minister update the House on the importance of strong and consistent border protection measures? Why is it important that policies be informed by advice and experience? And is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to say thank you very much to the member for Tangi for his question. Like all members on this side of the House, we want strong border protection policy in this country. And it is essential, Mr Speaker, that we have a consistency of policy, because recent history demonstrates to us what happens if you fail to take the expert advice. Now, what we know is that when Mr Rudd came into government in 2007, there were 4 people in detention and no boats were arriving. We know what happened when the Labor government was elected and changed the policy settings, threw out the expert advice in how to deal with the scourge of people smuggling. 50,000 people arrived on 800 boats and 1,200 people drowned at sea. Mr Speaker, 8,000 children ended up in detention. That is what happened when Labor ignored the advice of the experts. That is what happened when Labor listened to the left of their party, went after green seats and green votes in capital cities and denied an opportunity for common sense to be heard. That is the recent history of denying good advice, Mr Speaker. Now, you might be forgiven for believing, Mr Speaker, that there's an air of déjà vu in the public policy debate at the moment on energy, because the Labor Party has received, as we have, expert advice on how to provide reliable energy, that is, so that the power doesn't go out, so that we don't have blackouts like we've seen in South Australia. We've received expert advice about how to deliver power at the most affordable price, and we've received expert advice about how to reduce our emissions at the same time. This government is acting on that advice, Mr Speaker, the same as we did when it came to border protection policy. And let me predict this, Mr Speaker, that if the Labor Party is elected, if Mr Shorten, if the Leader of the Opposition becomes Prime Minister of this country, I can guarantee you that the boats will recommence. I can guarantee you, Mr Speaker, the kids will be back in detention. I can guarantee you, tragically, Mr Speaker, that there will be deaths at sea again because they will ignore the advice from the experts. I'll guarantee you something else, Mr Speaker. Under Labor, as we've seen with state Labor governments, I guarantee you that energy prices will be higher under Labor, and I guarantee you that there will be more blackouts for families and small business under Labor because they ignore the advice. They are captured by the left. They are trying to please people in green seats in capital cities around the country, and they are doing it at the human expense of families and small businesses around this country. And what it shows on a daily basis, Mr Speaker, is that this Leader of the Opposition can't be trusted by any Australian.
Members on my left, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that the Telecommunications Ombudsman annual report released today reveals that the number of complaints about the NBN has more than doubled, that internet services are now the highest source of complaints? Given that we're in the 5th year of the Prime Minister's mismanagement of NBN, isn't it clear that Australians are suffering with a second-rate NBN and that the Prime Minister is entirely to blame?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I want to thank the honourable member for his question, because it gives me an opportunity to remind honourable members once again that every 10 days the NBN, under our government, is connecting more Australians than Labor did in 6 years. They're connecting between 30 and 40,000 premises a week. 30 to 40,000 premises a week. There are now 3 million customers connected.
Prime Minister will just pause for a second. This won't take long. The member for Brand has been warned. She was warned very clearly that she will leave under 94A. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. The NBN is now available at over 6 million premises around Australia. It is on track to be completed by 2020. It's well past the halfway mark. It is going to be completed for $30 billion less than Labor would have spent, every dollar of which would have had to be repaid by higher fees by Australian customers, and indeed, Mr Speaker, it'll be completed 6 to 8 years earlier. Now, Mr Speaker, the Minister for Communications and I are very keenly aware that a number of Australians, a relatively small percentage terms, but because of the scale of the network, it amounts to increasing numbers of people are having bad experience with installation and are not getting the speeds they have paid for. And we are addressing that every day. We're in touch with the company, dealing with it, ensuring through the ACCC that people get the plans they're paid for and that the installation experience is improved. Mr Speaker, the NBN was a complete and utter train wreck when we came into government. There was no transparency, billions of dollars wasted under Stephen Conroy's appalling leadership. What we do is every week we put up all of the rollout figures. Australians can see how it's progressing. It's rolling out at an unprecedented rate. The rate of complaints has increased because the number of customers has increased too. The more customers you have, the more complaints you will have. What we are doing is bringing that down by ensuring that it delivers great service. That's our commitment, Mr Speaker. The NBN Co was a wreck when we inherited it, and we're now making it happen. It's an example of strong, hard-headed business leadership based on economics and engineering. It's taking a hard-headed approach to it, just as we've done to energy policy. Labor was all ideology, all politics when it came to the NBN, and the cost was paid in billions. They've done the same thing with energy, and again, the cost is paid in billions and lost jobs and hardship for Australian families.
The member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the Minister outline to the House how the Turnbull government is assisting hard-working Australian exporters maintain their competitive on global markets by guaranteeing an affordable and reliable energy supply? Is the Minister aware of any threats to our competitiveness?
The Minister for Trade and Investment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for O'Connor for his question because, like those on this side of the chamber, he's passionate about opening up those opportunities for Aussie exporters, knowing full well that opening up those overseas markets has been critical to driving economic growth and making sure we're creating jobs for Australians. That's part of the reason why, under this coalition, we've now got a record amount of exports, some $365 billion. Export volumes are up 5.4% year on year thanks to the Coalition's free trade agreements, and we're now operating an annual trade surplus, something we haven't seen for a while as a consequence of the Coalition's free trade agreements. So whether it's abalone farmers in Esperance or wine producers in Mandurah, the fact is that the Coalition is delivering better market access, which makes a difference to exporters in the member for O'Connor's electorate and indeed electorates all across Australia. Now, it's no secret that in order for us to remain competitive, which I know is a concern that the member for O'Connor raised, they've got to have access to affordable and reliable electricity. In fact, the President of the National Farmers Federation, Fiona Simpson, said only yesterday, and I quote, "Farmers across the country, dairy farmers, fruit and vegetable producers, irrigators, are hurting from spiralling electricity prices and unreliable power supplies." Fiona Simpson actually goes to the very core of what the Coalition's policy is aiming to address: affordability and reliability. And it's the Coalition's energy guarantee that we've put forward that will address that and ensure Australian exporters remain competitive in an international context. So for that reason, the Coalition is not going to back away from a policy that we know will produce good outcomes. And in fact, it's not just members, exporters in Esperance, it's also, for example, the CEO of BlueScope Steel, Paul O'Malley, who said of the National Energy Guarantee, and I quote, "It turns the game around." Now, steel exports are worth something like $2 billion to the Australian economy. So we've got great support from the member for O'Connor's electorate, great support from people like Paul O'Malley, but who stands in the way, Mr Speaker? Who stands in the way of a policy that delivers more reliability and delivers more affordability? Only the Australian Labor Party at a state and federal level. And if you look at, for example, Queensland, where we saw the Queensland state government openly stand on the sidelines why Queensland Labor-owned generators by the Queensland government participated in uncompetitive bidding practices, pushing the price of energy up. Why? Because the beneficiary was the Queensland Labor government. So no surprises that the Queensland Labor government wants to stand in the way of more reliable and more affordable energies, and no surprises that the Federal Labor Party wants to stand in the way as well.
The member for Greenway.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's previous answer. Does the Prime Minister appreciate that the majority of new NBN customers previously had a working internet service? Is the Prime Minister so out of touch that he doesn't understand that people are complaining because his second-rate copper NBN is slower, more expensive and less reliable than what the Prime Minister promised?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for a question because it gives me an opportunity to update my earlier answer. As of today, as of the 12th of October, the latest numbers, 6,188,000 premises are able to connect to the NBN, and 3,024,650 are activated paying customers. And Mr Speaker, nearly 40,000 premises were activated on the NBN in the last week. Labor, remember, 50,000 in 6 years. Now, Mr Speaker, the reality is this. As the honourable member knows, and she should know this, that what has been going on is that retail service providers, Telstra, Optus, TPG, have not been buying enough bandwidth to provision their customers. That is being investigated by the ACCC.
Member for
It's
Cowan.
been called out. They've been given 3 months to get their act together and ensure that what they promise they deliver. It has nothing to do with whether the network is fibre to the premises, fibre to the basement, fibre to the node or hybrid fibre coax. The problem of under-provision by retail service providers is common across
Member
all
for Kingston
technologies
and the
on
member
the
for
NBN
Franklin.
network. The honourable member should recall that she was part of a government that completely and utterly failed this project. They left us a train wreck. We've turned it around. We're getting it built. We're getting it built. Over 6 million premises can connect. Over 3 million are connected and are active paying customers, and it'll be finished by 2020.
The member for Page.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, representing the Minister for Regional Development. Will the Minister advise the House how the government's National Energy Guarantee will help strengthen and drive regional development by providing certainty to investors, businesses and hard-working Australian families? And is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Infrastructure.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Page for his question. And like all members on this side of the House, he understands the importance of reliable and affordable energy, particularly the importance for low-income earners in his electorate. Now, I am surprised, Member for Page, I am surprised to hear those opposite talking about a potential $115 per year reduction in household energy bills as being lousy. I mean, how out of touch are those opposite to think that's lousy? On this side of the House, what do you think? In your electorate, $115 per year reduction in your energy bills. Hands up if you think your low-income earners would appreciate that. Hands up if you think they'd appreciate it. Do you think they'd appreciate that? Hands up if you think the small business owners, how much do you think the small business owners would appreciate $115 a year reduction in their energy bills? Now look at those opposite. Do you reckon anyone... Hands up if you think the low-income earners in your electorate would appreciate a $115 reduction. Hands up if you think any of them. So none of you think $115 a year is important. None of you think $115 a year reduction...
The Minister for Infrastructure will pause for a second. Members on my left will cease interjecting. The Minister won't try and conduct a survey in the chamber. It's against the standing orders.
Speaker, I think we've completed the survey, Mr Speaker, and no one opposite believes that reducing power prices by $115 per year is a good result for low-income earners in their electorate. Well, on this side, we know it is a good idea. We know that reliable and affordable energy is so crucial to low-income earners and to families, to small businesses and to manufacturers. Manufacturers in towns like Casino and Grafton, Lismore and Yamba, or Bill Collingburn at the Yamba Welding and Engineering. He knows if you take some of the pressure off his energy bills, it's going to mean he can employ more people in that beautiful part of the world. Now, Mr Speaker, the Turnbull-Joyce government is delivering. We're taking action with our National Energy Guarantee. Our National Energy Guarantee is a huge step forward, Mr Speaker. It will take pressure off households. It will help to secure jobs. It will allow for certainty of investment by our power generators and also for our providers of baseload energy, particularly in electorates like my own in Gippsland, in the Latrobe Valley. So those opposite want to talk about guarantees, Mr Speaker, and I'll tell you one thing has been guaranteed. Blue-collar workers will lose their jobs under this government, under the opposition's plan. Oh, they've found their voice. They don't find their voice to stand up for blue-collar workers in this place. Now, there is an alternative approach. The member Page asked me about an alternative approach. There is an alternative approach. The Labor way, or the modern Labor way, I should say, the modern Labor way, is to vilify power station workers. It's not to ever stand up for blue-collar workers. It's to come in this place and to sell out for Green votes. Those opposite are hopelessly compromised, Mr Speaker, when it comes to blue-collar workers. So I challenge them. I challenge those opposite, particularly those from regional areas like the member for Hunter, the member for Shortland, the member for Herbert, to finally actually stand up for some blue-collar workers, to stand up for blue-collar workers like old Labor members used to do. Get fair dinkum about the blue-collar workers in your electorates. Get fair dinkum about energy affordability and supply, and support the National Energy Guarantee.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I thank the Prime Minister.